this is always a fun week. I mean, you get to see everyone here. I mean, obviously all our friends and associates in the media are here. Seeing guys like Dan's back, and there's Edmonds and John Liu. And you got the excitement of, of a new season upon. Before we get into what we've seen on the ice, we knew that probably the biggest story at the beginning of training camp was what we were going to hear from Connor Hellebuyck and what we were going to hear from Mark Scheifele. You were there yesterday. I mean, what were your reactions to the two biggest stories around the offseason and those two players and how they handled their first visit with some of the biggest scrums I've ever seen in Winnipeg Jets 2.0 history, to be perfectly honest with you?
Yeah, Huss, it was playoff-like in terms of the atmosphere, in terms of what was going on. Yeah, sorry about that. Technical difficulties, part of the brand.
It's just a cord.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I would say that probably a little bit of an element of coaching may have been involved, but I think that the players spoke maybe as freely as they could given the circumstances, right? I mean, I would say let's start. Helly is maybe a little bit of a bigger news because there have been more rumors circulating around or speculation about his future. But let's start with Scheifele. I think that the reason why I want to start there is because it was awfully different tone to what Steven Stamkos had the day previous. Those two players in the exact same scenario when it comes to their contracts, both lifers with their organizations. And I would say Steven Stamkos, without using his name in particular, he put Julien Brisebois on blast publicly. Whereas Mark Scheifele, even though he let out the little morsel that there haven't really been any real there have been meetings, but there haven't really been any extension talks. He handled that much. I mean, Steven Stamkos was calm, but the disappointment was quite clear. Whereas Mark, I found, was very level-headed, and he knows what needs to be done. He certainly understands the situation for himself and for the organization, and he knows it's a bit of a show-me year in some regards, not just for the Jets, but for the league in general. But I think he's ready. I had a chance to talk with him before the scrum briefly. He had a big golf trip for his 30th. We talked a little bit before he went to the podium. He seemed to be in good spirits. Now, that's very similar to last year when he was in great spirits. And I think he was in great spirits for the majority of the year until maybe February, March, April. And then obviously tough ending with the injury. But I think Mark definitely made it clear he has A, not asked for a trade, and B, he's open to staying, which I understand people can be as skeptical as they want to be, but the facts are he hasn't asked out, and he's not if there is a trade, it's not because he's the one saying, I got to get out of here. So to me, that was my takeaway. He's ready to go. Right now, we know he's excited to be playing with Gabe Vilardi and back with Kyle Connor. And I think Mark is in good spirits. He's not going to let this become a distraction for him. I mean, it is a new situation for him, for sure, but I don't see this being an issue for him. Mark's not going to be sweating over, oh, man, well, if I'm in Toronto, someone's going to ask me this question here or there. He legitimately said, this is beyond my purview, basically. Now, it's easy to say Mark's saying it's out of his hands. Some people are bent out of shape over that. But what Mark meant was, until I'm presented with an offer about what it's going to be like for me to potentially stay, what do you want me to do?
Yeah. You know what?
You want me to slide the envelope across the table, Huss, with this is my number? I mean, it's
want to go out and play his ass off, win some hockey games, play well, and see what he can do to boost his stock potentially in the eyes of this organization or others around the National Hockey League.
Absolutely.
And I can't say that I expected any different. I thought he did quite well. I mean, as far as, putting, the best foot forward, saying, these, at the end of the day, he really can only control what he can control. And everything else is secondary if he, doesn't perform and doesn't produce. Yeah. I mean, he's that important to this hockey club. So that's Scheifele. And then there was Hellebuyck. And listen, that was an all-time Hellebuyck presser yesterday. Like, we always talk about his supernatural level of confidence. I said to yesterday, if there's one thing to take away from yesterday, folks, believe in yourself as much as Connor Hellebuyck believes in himself. no shortage of confidence yesterday from Helly, and very, very clear about what his goal is, and that is to win in the National Hockey League. And at the same time, similarly to Mark, did not rule anything out. What was your takeaway?
Yeah, team first. And the last thing, too, with Mark, I want to say, like, there's this perception about, potential selfish behavior. Mark made sure to point out, I'm not the only one in this situation. And he wasn't pointing it out to say, look at me. He pointed it out to say, hey, man, the Vezina candidate is in this situation. So is the top pair defenseman. So is the perennial 20-goal guy. And so is the backup goalie. So he doesn't want it to be, this firestorm around him. He knows what he has to do to play well. And he has put in the work to play well. So now it's incumbent upon him to just do what Mark Scheifele does, which is perform at a high level. So if he can do that over the course of the year, that's going to benefit himself, and it's going to benefit his bargaining power, quite frankly. In terms of Hellebuyck, yeah, all-timer for Hellebuyck.
Good.
But the one thing that, I'm not going to say I took issue with, Huss, but you can't say there's all these rumors and I don't want to pour gasoline on the rumors, but then pass on the opportunity to clear it up. Connor, this is why we're here. There don't need to be any rumors. We're not speculating. We're asking you flat out what you want or what it's going to take. Now, I'm not expecting him to tell me it's going to take $10 million, Ken, thanks for asking, or it's going to take 7 or 8 years. But when I ask you how important is term to you, you can't really say, I don't want to get into it. I'm going to do what's best for me and my family. Well, then people naturally are going to think it has to be 5 years or more, right? I mean, and if you don't, and that's okay. But if you don't want people to speculate on a short-term deal versus long, say what's important to you, right? I mean, this was his opportunity. Now, and I totally get it. If Connor, what he didn't say is that it's kind of none of your business. So, and that's okay for him to say, but it is our job to try and find out. If he doesn't want to share, that's okay. But it was also funny in saying, well, I'm sure my agent would like to talk to you. Lots of us have talked to Ray Petkow. He's not talking on the record about the negotiations because he never does. And that's okay too. But that was the only thing for me. I mean, I have no issue with him saying it, but this was the opportunity to kind of, quiet some of those rumors or speculation. Now, again, I love the fact that he had some fun with it. You guys are going to write your fun stories. You're going to say this. I think you should focus on that. Like, it's classic. Like, you tell me how I should be playing goal. I'll be more than happy to tell you, don't write about this. You should write about this. Like, I love it. I mean, that's the personality that Connor Hellebuyck has always had. It was playful. It was fun. And ultimately, this is what he said. And this is what we knew he would say. This is about what he's been saying this since he won the Vezina. The only thing that matters to me is winning the Stanley Cup. The only difference is he said, well, I'm here. I believe we can win the Stanley Cup. So I'm going to win the Stanley Cup. Like, again, this is vintage Hellebuyck willing it to happen. And I'm glad he used that tenor and wasn't trying to be someone he's not. He was flat out himself. He doesn't care to talk about it after this. And he doesn't care if you ask him because he's not going to talk about it after today until something happens. And I totally understand that. And the other part is true. We've been saying this for months. All of this can change with one phone call, Huss. We know this. So he's not going to say, yeah, I'm on the record saying this. And then the next day the phone call comes, the offer's higher, and I signed, right? I mean, what we know is that it's going to be a story. But it only becomes a story if the Jets are struggling, because then there will be a push to maximize the asset in terms of trade. Now, we understand that the asset managers don't want to walk down the road that Kevin Cheveldayoff walked the other day. He didn't dismiss the direct question about whether that means potentially keeping both players beyond the deadline. The Jets don't see the deadline as March 8th. They see the deadline as July 1st. And I've said this before. I'm okay with it. The Jets, this is Mark Scheifele's 13th season with the organization. You can't look at the scenario and say you have not extracted enough value from that 7th overall pick. And I know the argument is, the flip side is, well, no, you're only maximizing it by moving it and getting something else to keep the asset alive in a sense. I understand that viewpoint, but if you're trying to win, and the Jets are clearly on record as trying to win, they're not trying to make the playoffs as their end goal. They're trying to win.
They're going to have a lot more information at the end of February than they do right now.
For sure, Huss. Yeah. But the point is, if they get to that point, it's in some ways similar to the Leafs. If Nylander stays beyond March 8th and signs somewhere else, but the Leafs put up a banner, no one's going to be saying, Brad Treliving, you're nuts for not moving him, right? Yeah. But if you don't win, now you set yourself up for the asset management side of things. And I'm not saying you don't have to manage your assets. What I am saying, and have been saying for months to the people who say your only option is to move that player, is that if I had told you in June of 2011 that Mark Scheifele would give the organization 11 full seasons, 6 of which were as a point per game player or better, and 1 of which was a 42-goal season, you would have been thrilled as a general manager or B, a fan of the organization.
No one disputes that. I think what people, and listen, you have to look at this in the frame of Winnipeg and the Winnipeg Jets. This isn't the Toronto Maple Leafs.
No, but who's replacing Mark? Like, who's replacing the number 1 center if you don't have Mark? Right? That's a question for the now and for later. So I get it. That's part of the equation.
Well, I'll turn that back to you and go, if he walks away for nothing, who's replacing him?
Well, you have $6 million to replace him, I guess. That would be my argument on the counter.
Well, all I'm saying, it's a little different. The Leafs with that sort of a hold, that sort of money, very different story than Winnipeg. And I think that is why there's a sect of people. And listen, I would include myself in that group that thinks it would be, like, I'm not going to come out and say it would be malpractice to do that. I mean, listen, if you're in a contending position, good teams don't trade their best players when they think they have a chance to win. But to me, Ken, this comes back to why I think that this first 25, 30 games and the range of possibilities that we can see from this club are so interesting, in that if this team is really good, then what we're talking about, I think, is far more of a possibility. Sure. If they're not, then you're figuring things out and you're making a decision one way or the other. You're getting these guys signed or you're moving them, and you're moving forward quicker with those decisions as opposed to kicking it down the hall and waiting for it.
Absolutely right. And again, I'll use another couple examples. John Tavares, the year that the Islanders kept him through the deadline, they were trying to win the Stanley Cup. The franchise didn't fold when John left, right? I mean, they actually were still competitive after that. So I'm just saying that, and even too, I'll use Boston as an example. They knew that Krejci and Bergeron were probably gone at the end of last year. And I know it's apples and oranges, but they were trying to win because those two guys helped give them the best chance because they were on lower contracts. Mark is in a position where he's making $6 million. You can't replace a number 1 center for $6 million. So anything the Jets could potentially get up to March 8th, it's hard to envision that player being able to walk into the top line center job, which is why you have to consider keeping him beyond that time. Does that create a potential problem for replacing him? Of course it does. Huss, 13 seasons. The Jets have not signed a number 1 center as a free agent. They've brought in a 1B in Pierre-Luc Dubois, who cost them a 2nd overall pick, right? So it's hard to find a number 1 center. Can Cole Perfetti grow into that? Absolutely he can. Can he do it by next season? That's a great question that we don't have the answer to right now.
Okay, well, let's focus in on Shea for a minute just before we move on to some of the new players. And I guess this goes back to what Rick Bowness had to say.
You bet.
Because you were exactly right. He did sound like, I remember how energized and full of life he seemed to be at the beginning of last season, which was starkly in contrast to when we had heard him at the end of the previous season before. Right. And everything went so well for him personally and for the team. It's not the first time we've seen this team nosedive in the second half of the year. And obviously, I mean, Mark in particular was sort of maybe the the flashpoint of this last year because of the benching, how he handled it, what Rick Bowness had to say on a number of occasions, to the point where he wasn't even, never mind number one center, he wasn't even a center at the end of the season. Where do you think things went wrong last year? And I mean, Rick Bowness, he's not shying away from it. He mentioned that. He's talked about it. He knows that's happened. How do they avoid doing that again? Whether we want to focus on 55 or the team overall, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, those two things go hand in hand. Mark's that important to the Jets.
Yeah, Mark's been the flashpoint person, but he was far from the only person who had a nose, dipped down the stretch. I wouldn't use
Absolutely.
nosedive, but he had a lot of company in that regard and still was able to be productive. And honestly, his defensive lapses, I think, were fewer than previous years. There were still some there, and they become glaring because the spotlight's on them. But the team didn't defend well. It wasn't. I'm not out here pointing my finger at Mark saying the Jets tanked
he got moved
because
out
of
of
Mark.
center. I mean, obviously, it was an issue to the coach.
For sure, but part of that was because both Scheifele and Dubois wanted to play with Connor, and the easiest way to do that was to put the three together. I don't think this is as simple as saying Mark's ignoring his down low responsibilities, get on the wall for a while. I think it was meant to try to jumpstart all three of those guys, because let's be honest, Dubois was a point-a-game player through 50 games, then his production dipped. Kyle Connor went from 47 to 31 goals and dipped 10 or 12 points. So everyone was down last year. And even Scheifele went from a point-a-game player to 68 in 81. So
Although he had 42.
42 was an amazing accomplishment.
2019 was where this trend started.
Sure, yep.
2021, I guess, it happened again. And then with a new head coach,
Yep.
it happened last year.
One of those years, Mark was hurt down the stretch after that separated
and
shoulder
19
from
Buff was hurt as
and
well.
then Parker Kelly. I mean, 19 Morrissey and Bufflin were hurt for the last 20. So again, not glossing this over, those are facts. The Jets have dipped at the most important time of the year almost every year since their run to the conference final. That needs to change. I think what Rick Bowness meant when he said, I learned a lot about this group down the stretch and in the playoffs, what he didn't want to elaborate on was that he knows now when he can push and when he needs to do a little more patting on the back. And again, this is not just for Mark specifically. This is for a lot of their star players. They've got a team that, he's not going to change his style. He's not going to coddle the group, but I would imagine what Rick meant is that he maybe won't be as direct. And I don't mean that indirect in terms of publicly. I think privately, I think he'll be direct. I don't know. I mean,
Adam Lowry's the captain now,
person.
and the Jets are paying Blake Wheeler $5 million to no longer be here on this club. How much does that change Rick Bowness's ability to be frank, honest, and direct with his club and not be, kind of managing fragile egos?
Yeah, I don't think that Rick didn't tread lightly around the group. One of his first acts was to take the captaincy away from the alpha of the team. So I don't
just
think
saying
it's
that
changing.
he's learned when, and I think you're right.
I just mean that I think there are also times where what Rick also kind of said, but didn't want to say in a negative light. He knew that when he sensed something was starting to unravel, he will now catch it before the yarn has gone down the hallway with the cat, if you will, right? He's not going to wait until it's gone a little bit too far. And he was very direct in terms of saying that. I don't think Rick has changed. Rick said, I'm not here to win a popularity contest. He wasn't there to win a popularity contest when he took the leadership responsibility away from Blake last year. So I don't think there's a massive change, but the fact that they're trying, I think he empowered some other people last year in that move. And some people can say whatever they want. Oh, down the stretch, it didn't work out, so it wasn't the right move. I think you're going to see some of the benefits to those moves as we move along here into the season. I don't think that there will be an unraveling or a spiraling out of control like we saw last year. I think Rick's, we can't forget, we sometimes gloss this over. Rick's own health last year, I think, was a factor in how some of the things happened too. He had some long COVID symptoms. So again, that's neither here nor there, but I think it is a factor that is worth recognizing. I think Rick is going to be Rick. He's a frank person. even at the times where he catches himself and maybe doesn't want to be as honest as maybe he feels like he should be, he still is that honest, right? So
does the removal of Blake Wheeler in that room as the de facto leader, whether you want to put a C on his jersey or not, allow Rick Bowness more freedom to do what he wanted to do?
Yeah, I just don't think there's a huge difference. I don't think that.
Then why did they do it?
No, I just don't think that Blake inhibited him from the way that he like.
Then why did they cut the check for $5.5 million?
Oh no, that's got nothing to do with not wanting to change the culture. That I don't think I think we're talking about two different things. Rick being Rick had nothing to do with Blake being gone. Blake being gone had more to do with giving opportunities to others and allowing their voices to be heard a little bit more clearly, even though they were maybe heard a little bit more. It's also hard to operate in terms of, like, the theory was that you give more voices, but some people still may not have felt comfortable sharing those voices with Blake still there. But for me, I just think they're separate tracks. I think that Blake not being here just allows for a fresh start in some ways, new look, whatever you want to call it. This isn't just a new coat of paint. It's an opportunity for them to take this group another direction. And that's not to diminish what Blake has done. We've talked about it tons of times. 16 goals, 55 points for anyone, let alone someone who is 36 years old, was an outstanding year for Blake. And he was part of the reason the Jets got off to a good start, because he was being used less. But after the injuries with Wheeler and then later on Perfetti, Blake was back to playing 20 minutes a night. And although he gave you everything he had in those 20 minutes, Blake wasn't a 22-minute player in the league anymore. And that's got nothing to do with his effort level.
Yeah,
it was Father Time.
I mean, we know this organization. We know that, especially right now, the financial challenges that the team has. I mean, for the Winnipeg Jets to pay a lifetime Jet, a guy that'll probably be up in the rafters.
Oh, he will definitely be in the rafters.
The money that they did to beat it, I mean, tells you that this was, it had to be done. I guess, obviously the feeling internally
and
was.
I think it's for both sides, Huss, and that's what we talked about at the time. Like, the Jets couldn't find a trade even where they ate 50%, right? I mean, Blake at $4 million versus Blake at 1.2 for a cap crunch team was an impossibility, right? There are teams that would have taken Blake's money on, but it would have cost you an asset. So we're not just diminishing the amount of money. It's a massive amount of money to not play, but it wasn't just path of least resistance. It was really their only path, and it was a path that helped Blake find another job with a good team rather than sending him somewhere where it wasn't going to work.
I mean, listen, they need to worry about this team, and they're obviously doing that. Totally. I don't get you wrong. They wanted to do right by him, for sure.
That's what I mean.
And to do that. Listen, we could talk about this for an hour, and this will be something that we'll watch throughout training camp and into the season, is how this team is different. A big part of that is the new players coming in from LA. Got a chance to see Vilardi playing with Scheifele and Connor yesterday for the first time. I got my first chance to see Iafallo in the morning group today. I know you were here yesterday and you talked to him a little bit. First of all, what do you think of him just on the ice? On the ice with his teammates for the first time, and what did he have to say when you had a little chat about his new home and getting things going with Winnipeg? For
sure. First with Vilardi, he's a bigger guy. I knew, again, you look at the hockey DB, says 6'3", 215. This is a guy, he looks big out on the ice, and I don't mean that in a big and clunky way. He gets around well.
I agree. I
think he's bigger than 6'3", and he can really rip it. Like, this is a guy that can shoot the puck, high-end release. He will be a pure, that's a weapon. Like, when you're looking at all three of those players, if that's the way the line stays together, all three guys can rip it. Scheifele, even since he broke into the league, we always talked about his release. Kyle Connor, one of the quickest releases in the NHL. And Vilardi, really heavy shot, gets it off quickly, and a big body. He'll be a load down low. And Mark, too, at 6'3" or whatever he is now. Like, those are two big guys on that line that can protect the puck. Mark likes to hang on to the puck and find someone. Rick talked about it early in the camp. They were, first in chances created to the slot, but didn't convert. Gabe Vilardi is a guy that can convert. Alex Iafallo, spoke with him. I'll be writing about him for the Free Press Saturday edition. He's loving it so far. Great little tie-in. Dominic Toninato and him, they spent 5 years together at the university, first at the Fargo Force of the USHL, then at UMD. Lived together for 4 of those 5 years. So These guys know each other extremely well. He's really excited. He is, Huss, the new Swiss Army knife from the long lines of Michael Frolik, Andrew Kopp, Matthew Perreault, like a guy that you can basically put anywhere and get success out of. To me, he reminds me a lot of Chris Kunitz, a guy that, maybe not the most skilled guy in the league, but you could play him with Sidney Crosby. But you could also play him with Nick Bonino when you're protecting a 1-goal lead late in the game. Really energetic skater, gets in your face physically, chased around Connor McDavid for the last 2 playoffs in the first round where LA made a great run. So really impressed by him. And Rasmus Kupari as well. Had a chance to speak with him along with Mike McIntyre. Really, I'm intrigued by him, Huss. Incredible skater. We knew that on the scouting report. Really gets around well. And the one thing I've noticed from the first couple of days of sessions, he puts himself in position to create offense. Now, can he start converting that offense at a higher rate than he has so far? That's up to him. And some of that will be related to opportunity. But I think he's the under the radar guy, even though he was a first-round draft pick, and IFL is an undrafted free agent. Kupari is kind of a chance, and Rick Bowness kind of hinted at this. I don't see him as pigeonholed to be a fourth-line center. That may be his role right now, but I think there's a little bit more there that he could play up and down the lineup, a lot like Iafallo will as we move along. So those 3 guys are all intriguing to me. Perfetti's looked good at center, moving well, Huss. And again, people forget, because of the back injury last summer, not this summer, Cole wasn't on the ice a lot. So everyone was saying Cole's got to get faster. It's hard to get faster when you're not on the ice until August. So this year, great summer of training with Matt Nickel in his group in Toronto. He's getting around the ice really well. Cole's very studious. We've always known this about him. He's digging in with Adam Lowry when it comes to face-offs and getting edges. He's talking with Mark Scheifele about responsibilities and what reads he's going to make. His answer to me yesterday, Huss, I'm sure you saw it, absurdly good when I asked him about moving to center and how he broke it down in layman's terms of how you can view both sides of the ice instead of being the guy on the wall having one option. Like, we've often talked about the word processor for him working at a pretty high rate compared to, even the high-end guys in the NHL. His elite thinking.
He's got an Intel chip.
He has the Intel chip, yes. His SIM card is operating at a very high level, and it will continue to do so. And again, now it's about handling the physical side of it. And that's what I love, the fact that he said, he didn't say one of my goals is to be a point-a-game player. I want to play in 82 games. Yeah. I want to play in all the games. You know why? Because he knows how important it is, and he doesn't want to get that label of being a guy who can't play a full season. He knows it's a challenge, but he has put in the work, and the fact that he changed trainers to begin with leads you to believe that he's invested in this so much. This guy loves hockey, and he knows that it's a physical responsibility to move to center, but he put in the work in order to make that happen. So that's another thing that stood out to me so far.
Speaking of being healthy, Perfetti's at the front of that list. His projected line mate, Nikolai Ehlers, lasted for 17 minutes and then had neck spasms. Ominous start to the season, or not a big deal?
I would say it's in the small deal category, Huss, is what I would say. Most people, I saw Nikolai Ehlers leave the ice walking down the hallway with Rob Millette yesterday. Before I knew it was not a lower body issue, I would have said big deal. The fact that it's neck spasms, haven't really dealt with that personally, but this is something that may have been a bad night's sleep. This is not something where I had a groin injury, I missed half a season, now I couldn't get through the first session. So to me, it's a very small deal. Of course, it's unfortunate. Nikolai Ehlers would rather be involved longer than the first drill on the first day of training camp. But Nikolai Ehlers was in the hallway talking to media members the day before and could not have been in a better mood, and he was healthy. So I think it's a small deal. The Jets are going to be careful with Ehlers because of the history, but Ehlers also put in the work that he wants to be a 72 to 82 game player instead of a 45 game player, and I don't think there's an issue there. I think he'll be perfect with Perfetti and Nino. You got a battering ram. You've got a blazing speed guy on the other side. All 3 of those guys can shoot it as well. So I like the way the units are constructed. We'll see if they stay that way. And then now after that, it's basically a battle for the 13th forward job. And then now we're going to see how Right now we don't have any hints on the back end, Huss, because all the veterans are playing with younger players right now. So we don't know who has the leg up or how Declan Chisholm might work his way up the depth chart. You might say, oh, well, Hanel is with Schmidt. Well, there's your third pairing. Well, let's see how the games go before we get to that. I love, as someone who's talked a lot about Elias Solomonson, I love the fact that they have him with Josh Morrissey.
Oh, me too.
This does not mean he's on the team, but I think we're going to see that pairing in a game. Whether it's I would think it's more likely to be in the home game on Monday than on Sunday against McDavid. But I think it's great for him to get his feet wet that way. And it's the inverse of when Buff said, "Give me the kid." Now Josh is saying, "Come on down to Winnipeg," to borrow the Willie Jefferson phrase, and take a seat beside me on the top pairing. I'll help you get adjusted to the NHL game, even though I know you're probably going to be playing in Sweden this year. I love that pairing, and I want to see it in a game. To a degree, I don't think you're wanting to throw that out against McDavid now on Sunday night as your welcome to the NHL
Why
moment.
not?
Well, I'm not saying he can't do it. I'm just saying that I think it's more likely the Jets will play him in the home game against the watered-down Oilers lineup. And again, it's not that he needs protection, but a lot of guys playing in the NHL for a long time need protection from Connor McDavid. So I don't know that we want this to be your welcome to the NHL moment, but that's what stood out to me, Huss. Colby Barlow, a little bit under the weather today, but it's been interesting to watch so far. Again, important not to put it. It's not that you don't put any stock in, but remember, it's a marathon.
It's the second day of training camp.
It's a marathon to October 11th. Don't overreact, people.